is Amanda Welch welcoming you to this Bite-Sized Bio webinar. Today's presentation is titled Grant Writing, Everything But the Science, and is being presented by Kate Christian, who is the Research Program Manager at Cure Cancer in Australia. Kate Christian has worked in health and medical research for over 30 years, mostly for organizations conducting and supporting cancer research. Scientifically trained, she has chosen not to work in a laboratory, but to use her scientific background and a flair for organization to manage research projects and assist scientists with the management of their research. Her objectives have included providing environments and skills which encourage effective, efficient research, and to encourage and facilitate communication about that successful research to all stakeholders. The nature of her work has involved Kate with many early career researchers in a range of disciplines, and she's developed skills in teaching them how to manage themselves, their research, and their careers. Her recently published book, Keys to Running Successful Research Projects, All the Things They Never Teach You, is a compilation of the steps she believes it takes to make a successful and productive researcher. All you need to add is good science. Now, having built up this body of expertise over many years, Kate is developing this learning further by undertaking a PhD. Here, she is focusing on the challenges faced by early career researchers in the sciences in Australia, which are not dissimilar to those for scientists across the world, and looking for ways to address some of those challenges. This book provides one such tool. Now, if you have any questions, please email them to amanda@bitesizebio.com, and we'll be sure to pass them on to Kate. The recording of the webinar will be available at bit.ly/grantwritinghelp. That's bit.ly/grantwritinghelp, all one word, lowercase. So now over to you, Kate, for the presentation.
Thank you. So, as discussed, I'm Kate Christian, and I'm going to give you some generic tips about completing the extra bits that are part of a successful grant application. These are not about the science, but they're about managing the process and dealing with the parts of the applicant that make you stand out from the crowd. I'm going to talk about getting the process right, and then the fact that a grant application is actually a marketing document. We're going to cover many ways about how to best answer the questions about you and how to answer the questions about the importance of your research. And we're also going to look at some of the types of questions which typically cause difficulty. So, as discussed, I'm currently the Research Program Manager at Cure Cancer Australia. Kristen in her nice introduction has told you all about that. So I've been working in health and medical research for about 30 years. So also, as discussed, I've taken all the teachings and learnings of this career and recently written and published this book. So I believe that this is a compilation of all the steps it takes to make a successful and productive researcher. I wrote it for early career scientists and for people who look after them. And a very large portion of it is dedicated to the importance of enhancing your reputation by taking every opportunity to sell yourself and your ideas. And this, of course, is what you need to do with a grant application. I like to call this the guidelines for the guidelines. Your focus will inevitably be on your science, but the other parts matter too, and just as much, because they give the story about you, the applicant, and you want to be the applicant that they choose. Last week, I sat in as an observer for a number of grant review panels. It's a really valuable experience, and I like to do it whenever I can, because when you're just listening and have none of the documentation in front of you, they give me nothing. It's very easy to identify the mistakes which are common to many applicants. In summary, these mistakes are: big one, failure to talk yourself up sufficiently. Then the use of generic fluff in response to questions. Inappropriate use of acronyms really upsets the reviewers. Big lesson, don't use them. And then the use of scientific language in sections where plain language has been requested. So now we move on to some of the process. We'll start with start early. The most important, but the most ignored rule. You'll usually know in many months in advance when your application's due. Please don't leave them till the last minute. A rushed application will never be as good as one which was planned over weeks. It's all too easy to make a mistake, particularly if you're pressed for time. I recently sat on another panel, a panel reviewing tender applications for a technical service provider for medical research institutes. The variation in the applications was extraordinary. What was very clear, though, was which groups took time for preparing their application and paid attention to detail. One lot, who certainly wrote it the day of the deadline, didn't even manage to put in the budget. Their day's work was completely wasted, as of course we didn't even consider it. So these applications are documents which are vitally important to your future. Give them the time and respect they deserve. Now forgive these next two slides, because yes, they're blindingly obvious. Yet I'd be much better off than I am if I could have a few dollars for every time I've helped someone sort out the consequences of not reading the rules or understanding the requirements. You should find out as much as you can about who and what your potential funders want to fund. Funding agencies won't bend the rules to accommodate you, however good your idea is. They've decided what they want to do with their money, and they will stick to their plans. If you don't fit, go elsewhere. So check the fine print for your eligibility. Eligibility might be based on age or experience or use of some particular equipment, your location, or sometimes just the strength of the idea. Only proceed if you are actually eligible. You don't have the time to be overly speculative with your applications. So don't waste your time on something for which you don't have a chance. Obvious slide number 2. Please carefully check the process, as sometimes there are multiple parts to an application process and you don't want to miss one out. You may need, for example, to register online or declare your intention in advance, as well as submitting on the due date. So check the process too for the actual submission process. In some cases, there might be more than one document and they go to different destinations, and each one can be just as important as the other. Last and most obvious of all, make sure you use the correct forms. I mean, again, I shouldn't have to say this, but it happens. Typically, forms will change each year, so don't use last year's just because you have one on file. Last one about the process, keep copies as you go. Once you're underway, do keep copies as you go, either a hard copy or a PDF. It can be a disaster if something goes wrong mid-process and you lose all the data you've entered, and it does happen. Also, some application systems don't permit you to retain a copy of your application once it's been submitted. So once it's gone, and you no longer have an application, a record of what you wrote. So we've dealt with all that process. So we'll move on to what you write in your applications, the important part. So you do your best to make yours the chosen project. You must convince your reviewer that you are the special one. Realistically, a grant application is not just about the science, it's also about you. Of course, if your science is bad, don't expect your strength of character or sales or marketing ability to save you. You may not have a great deal of space to work with in your application because there'll be word count limitations, but you need to use any free text available within the application to demonstrate your knowledge of the research field and your broader research experience and the difference you are going to make as a consequence of your work. Scientists need to remember that it's people who may not be specialists or even scientists who are reading their applications. Scientific documents must be written with these people and an understanding of their level of engagement and knowledge in mind. So when you're writing your application, focus on the fact that it will be individuals, not computers, reviewing it. The reviewers might have a pile of 50 documents like yours on their desk. You're selling your story, so treat your application as a document which is marketing both you and your science. You want your message to stand out from the crowd. Even in a peer review process, you have to remember that some of your reviewers may not be as familiar with your field as you might expect. Some areas of science are particularly specialized, so you might end up being reviewed by scientists who come from a slightly different discipline and simply don't know as much as you do about your topic. This word of caution applies particularly in medical research, where there may be lay reviewers as well as scientists. In this case, I advise you to pay special attention to your plain language summary. Make it truly lay. So we now move on to questions about you and my bite-sized bio t-shirt. There are quite a lot of slides for this section, included because there are many ways you can sell yourself and your story. I want to make sure you're aware of all of them. It is, of course, very common to be asked to list all your publications. Sometimes all you have to provide is the list, but on other occasions, you can have a little more leeway. When you get the opportunity to do so, I suggest you use descriptive words to indicate if your papers were in high-impact journals. In some cases, the person reading your application mightn't be in your field, or may not be from it may even be from outside science, and they mightn't understand. In these situations, you can't rely on the reviewer to understand the difference between the New England Journal of Medicine and the University of La La Land Review, and they may not understand impact factor indices at all. Instead, I suggest that you write something a little more detailed, like, I published my findings in the leading journal in my field, X, whatever it was. If you can fit it in and it seems appropriate, also describe the impact of your papers and evidence of how your research in these papers has been translated into practice. It all just makes the list come a little bit more alive. On a related subject, another issue that came up several times in last week's reviews was insufficient information about the publications which were mentioned. So these were papers that were mentioned in descriptive text, but not talked about. Here the applicants describe publishing in illustrious journals, but without specifying either the title or the subject matter of the article. You can't expect your reviewer to go and look up your publications. So while your reviewer might be impressed that you've had a paper in Nature Communications, it's helpful for them to know what it was about in order to see if it relates to or complements the current project. When you mention a paper, I'd identify either its title or its subject. If you're asked to describe your contribution to the papers, think of this as another opportunity to make yourself sound good. Try to provide a full explanation of your input for each paper, especially noting how it relates to the proposed research. Similarly, if you have any patents, describe your original contribution as an inventor. As with the papers, you should explain the significance of the inventions and their relevance to the current project if you have space. It's always about space, and there are word count limitations, but this is cramming everything in that can make things sound good for you. The next question about you part, you might be able to provide evidence of your research experience and of novel approaches you've taken or instigated in your work. Obviously, here you can provide some detail about the variety of work you've done and how it's relevant to your current project. If you've changed fields during your research life, mention this and explain how each field has contributed to your development for the research you want to undertake now. Rather than being something to hide, a change in field is often seen as an advantage, as it enables you to have both a fresh approach and a wider perspective. Demonstration of leadership qualities is often important to a funding body too. Not only do they want to be able to support someone who'll do good research, but also someone who'll gather a good, strong team around them and develop more people to likewise do good research. In answering a question about research leadership roles, you should detail your supervision experience and include mention of the number of students you've supervised, whether they be honours, masters or PhD. Please always remembering to note the number who you've successfully completed. You can also write about your experience in lab supervision and any involvement in clinical practice or details of postgraduate teaching if they apply to you. When you're asked for other relevant experience, note that leadership covers more than supervisory experience. This is where you can tell them that you head the journal club or the leukemia interest group, even a social club. It's all part of building the picture of someone who gets involved and has leadership potential. You should mention any engagement you take on at work within your institution. Again, this engagement indicates your good citizenship and your contribution to the team and provides a good indication of your leadership potential. But engagement might include something like mentoring relationships or your membership of an institutional committee. Here it might be where you mention that you were part of the organizing committee for a conference or a series of seminars. All adds to your profile. Then, if you have the opportunity, include any community engagement you've been involved in and put in everything that you do. These interactions with the community really matter, and in fact, they're mattering more and more. They are definitely part of your CV. They indicate your support of the broad field you care about, your good citizenship, and your general contribution to society. So here you can talk about things like lab tours. This is clearly one of. Talks to community groups, your work with any not-for-profits, and other involvement with community groups in fundraising or providing volunteer assistance. Then you might be asked questions about administrative experience. When you receive a grant, you immediately need to learn how to administer your research. So if you've had some administrative experience already, say so. This in itself could be sufficient to make you different from another applicant. Your funder wants their money spent wisely and well, so tell them about any experience you've had doing this sort of thing. The last of the slides for questions about you is about academic qualifications and awards. Your membership of academic societies adds further depth to your profile. So if you're given the opportunity, list your memberships, particularly noting if you hold or have held competitive memberships or committee positions. Similarly, you might be invited to list your awards and scholarships. Again, these make you stand out from the crowd, so make the effort to include everything that can fit. Even awards offered when you were at a junior level form part of your picture. Now we'll address the types of questions which seem to cause difficulty. You won't have all of these on all grant applications, but these types of questions are relatively common. Track record relative to opportunity is a big one. As with a job interview, you need to convince your reviewer you've consistently overachieved throughout your career. So when you're asked about your track record, you need to try and pack in as many achievements as you can into the space available. This, of course, is particularly important when you're an early career researcher and you haven't yet accumulated a long track record. So here, word count permitting, you should tell them not only about your progress in publications and grants, but also about your experiences which demonstrate your leadership potential. So again, this is another place where it might include supervision, successful supervision of graduate students, oral presentations, developments of collaborations, or general networking things. It's all part of the picture of making you have achieved a lot in your short time available. Then the exceptional circumstances and career disruption questions. When you're asked to provide information about exceptional circumstances or career disruption, make sure you quantify your answers. Time off for children is the most common disruption, but don't just say, took time off to care for children. Spell out that you, for example, took 6 months parental leave in 3 different years, returning to work part-time. Specify those years and your part-time fraction. Allow the reader to understand quite how much time is being disrupted so that your situation can be properly evaluated with respect to your peers who may have experienced less or no disruption. In last week's grant review panels, although she was strongly commended for the value of her idea, one of our applicants was criticised and marked down for having only one first author publication since 2013. Now, I happen to know that since that time, she's had 3 children, including twins. In another part of our application, not seen by these reviewers, she probably would have specified her career disruption, but she failed to mention it in this section. And so there was no understanding that her accomplishments during this period had actually been incredible. You're unlikely to get time spent in another field or industry noticed as a career disruption, but sometimes these things to be dealt with in the previous section in the track record relative to opportunity. Here we move to questions about the relevance of your research. So these questions will be about the relevance of this project to you and to your career, as well as the bigger picture of relevance to your area of interest. The fund is not interested in merely providing money to keep you afloat. They want to know how this project will contribute to your development and also to the core issue. So we'll start with relevance to you. Here's your chance to describe your reason for choosing the laboratory or the place you plan to work, including your proposed mentoring arrangements. Your reviewers will be paying careful attention to this section, particularly if you're an early career researcher. They want to know that you're in the right place with the right people and the right infrastructure. So let them know what's to be there for you and how it will help. So to do this, detail the environment in which you'll be working and what it will provide in terms of mentorship and facilities. Mention the special access to expertise that will result if the project's successful. For example, if it means you'll move to a new lab, and refer to the technologies and equipment in that environment. Mention how your network might be extended and how new collaborations might be formed. It's all about how this new project is going to build you as well as your research. So, continuing that theme, we move on to how this project and the research environment will contribute to your career objectives. So a typical question here might be something like, briefly outline your career development objectives for the next 5 years and how the proposed project will foster these. To answer this, you should outline your specific career aims and objectives over the next 5 years. I want to do good research and publish lots of papers is not the answer. But you'd be surprised how many people write that. Your reviewer wants to see that you've thought about specific milestones. So you should provide a description of where you want to be in a few years. If the question says 5 years, tell them where you want to be in 5 years and how this project's going to help you get there and help you achieve your goals. It's also a good idea to use this question to identify any gaps in your track record and explain how this grant will help to fill them, noting that you recognize your deficiencies as a plus, not a minus. Last, this is where you can also note the expected tangible outcomes from your project. If, for example, this funding will allow the building of a team, outline the steps and how they're specific to the project. Questions about the relevance of your research to the core issue, which you hope will be a core issue for your potential funder, give you the chance to describe the specific nature of the problem you're interested in and its impact on people or nature or the environment, and about how your research will be relevant to it. Here you can clearly explain the impact and translation outcomes which could be expected from your project. This is not the time to say, heart disease is bad and kills a lot of people, or rust on wheat is a problem. We know that. Talk more directly about the part of the problem you're wanting to fix and why it matters. Don't do the generic stuff, do the specific stuff. The answer to this question might well be asked for in lay language. If this is the case, make sure that your description is simple enough so that a non-scientifically trained expert could understand it. Essentially, this is a similar process to writing a good abstract for a paper. Although use of clear lay language might be important throughout these sorts of questions, here is a particular section where you must be careful not to use acronyms or words which are too technical. These next slides about consumer involvement will be most relevant to people in health research, and for them it's becoming increasingly important. In my experience, the need to involve members of the public in their research causes more confusion and concern than any other aspect of the grant process. So first, an explanation of the term. In Australia, where I'm from, we use the term consumer for people who are affected by the disease in question, whether as a patient or as a carer or a family member. In other countries, these people might be known as patient advocates. There are often organizations who train these consumers to assist scientists with their research from the consumer's viewpoint. Consumers are not there to judge the value of your scientific approach, but to provide views about what's important to the group of people who suffer from the disease in question. Evidence suggests that involving consumers leads to improved health outcomes, improved safety, a more trusted health system, and a more satisfied workforce. And consequently, use of consumers in research is becoming more common. In many cases, there are consumers included on review panels, and their views carry a great deal of weight. So any request for consumer involvement should be taken seriously. You must allocate sufficient time to it before you submit your application, as loose plans to approach consumers after you get the funding will not be sufficient. So, a few more slides about consumers. For successful consumer involvement, there must be evidence that your consumers have been able to offer their thoughts on your research plan and have had a real opportunity to have their views heard. The expectation is that your interaction will be two-way and not simply you, the researcher, delivering your views and later results. If you struggle to understand why this is so, remember that a non-governmental funding organisation is likely to be primarily supported by people who've been touched by the disease or condition in question, so their views matter. Think of them as experts in their field, the field of the patient. In a section about consumer involvement, you should describe the roles and responsibilities for your consumers in your project, how consumers have been consulted already, and how they've influenced your project design and preparation for the application, exactly where they'll be involved to tailor your project in the next steps, the nature and timing of the meetings you've held to date and will hold in the future, the situation and timing for dissemination at the end of your project, and if you can, name your consumers as clear evidence that this involvement is already underway. Actually finding consumers and then allocating useful tasks to them is something that basic scientists in particular often struggle with. They can't imagine where they will find someone or what this involvement will look like. In this case, it'll be best if you can involve trained consumers who might be sourced from a community organisation whose purpose is advocating for patients or their families. I suggest you make contact with a support group for patients or their families of your disease type. Tell them what you're researching and ask if they can help you. Otherwise, there are often consumer groups formed by hospitals or research institutes to assist their researchers working within these organisations. If your workplace is associated with a hospital or patients, find the team which supports the external engagement. Last, if you make yourself available for information presentations to community engagement groups, you can tell them that you want consumer involvement for your project, and interested consumers may well find you. Here, with my last slide on this topic, I'll provide some suggestions about some of the many ways to involve consumers. You'll find they might be able to assist with formulating your questions and then disseminating your results. If your studies to have research participants, they'll also help you design your studies, making sure they're suitable for the participants and later with interpreting your results. A really good way to start is to talk to a patient or a former patient or family member about their experiences during diagnosis and treatment. That'll help you really understand what matters most to the patients. Check your views about why your research matters with your consumers. Do they agree? Do they understand? Have you missed the points that are relevant to them? You can explain your research plan to your consumers and listen to their feedback, and then incorporate their feedback if you can. Also, you can ask your consumers to review your documentation, and particularly your lay summaries. Again, do they understand? Were your lay summaries really lay? If they don't understand, other members of the public and maybe even your reviewers are unlikely to understand, and you can try harder. In a similar vein, once the research is underway, you can ask your consumers to review your progress reports and check they understand. You should also plan dissemination of your results with your consumers, making sure you cover the topics important to them. They will assist with the actual dissemination to their peers. You should invite their suggestions for additional avenues to disseminate your research and plan appropriate dissemination for each type of audience they suggest. So that's the end of my project, my talk. So as told in the beginning, due to time difficulties, this session's been pre-recorded. And if you have any questions, Bite Size Bio will send them on to me. But the answers should all be on my book. You can buy it direct from Elsevier at the address shown here. And importantly, if you write ATR30 at checkout, there's a 30% discount. So thank you very much. I hope you found this helpful.
Thanks, Kate. That was an excellent presentation. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. Again, if you have any questions, you can email them to amanda@bitesizebio.com and we'll be sure to pass them on to Kate. And thank you again, Kate, for a great presentation. And as always, thanks to you, the audience, for taking the time to attend and listen in. If you've enjoyed the webinar and would like to view the video recording of the session, please visit the webinars page on bitesizebio.com. This should be available within the next 24 to 48 hours. And there you can see the other webinars we have lined up for you in Bite Size Bio. So until next time, good luck in your research and grant writing, and goodbye from all of us at Bite Size Bio.